We did a study also which compared between all the known shine plug imaging what we have, and I have no financial interest in it. We have all the three machines, and we have actually uh, paid full amount to buy all these machines. So I'll be very unbiased in this. The Pentacam had the best repeatable values when you're looking at a keratoconic eye. Then comes the Cirrus, then comes the Galilei. And this is an honest opinion, and this paper has been published in IOVS again this year, and it's free for anybody to look at. What it means is, if you do not have a good machine to actually look at progression, you'll never be able to pick up any kind of keratoconus, and everything looks like a progressive disorder. One of the issues, I also use an OpScan. One of the issues with OpScan is there's never a case which looks stable on OpScan because the repeatability is so much, so bad that every case has to show a progression. So the Pentacam, sorry, OpScan. So that is one of the issues with this. So, but it's a great tool. OpScan is a great tool, but definitely not a tool for when you're working on a keratoconus treatment. So coming to my talk, which is on keratoconus management, which we call it as an 5-point nomogram. I think we have given a handouts on this 5-point nomogram. It just got accepted as a to be published in the IJO. The reason we wanted to have this nomogram is every new single day we come across new machines, new technologies, new protocols which confuses everybody. The first question, I have just 10 or 12 questions which I try to answer in this session, and then I leave it to the case presentation on this nomogram with Nikhil. The first question, which is very important question, is when do I treat? So there are different ways of looking at it, very subjective sometimes, because what is immediate to me may not be immediate to you. So each one of us may have a different way of looking at it. But what I put here is something which is traditionally taught in the literature what needs an immediate treatment. For example, a young patient, thickness less than 455 microns, females do have a more tendency to progress. You have to have a documented progression. Without documented progressions of no use, a strong family history and a severe allergy of any sort. Even if that's a bronchial asthma and the patient is young, I would still consider it as a systemic disease and still try to treat it. Weight, when your thickness is high, you are a male patient, you have no documented progression and no allergy, the patient has no history of eye rubbing, they probably would wait. But is it really good enough? And the question is so broad. Like I said, you can add 10 to the other side and 10 to this side and you're still not sure when to treat. So what we did in this nomogram is we made a scoring system. This scoring system, we looked at high risk factors. It's all there in that handouts which we have given. It's also probably going to be published in IJO shortly. Is the age factor, the eye rubbing, the atopic eye disease, the frequent change of glasses, because that tells us the change of cylinders, and the others. We have given scoring system to each one of it. When you actually add the scoring system, you can actually get what is high risk and what is low risk and what is moderate risk. What it means is that by doing this, you actually change a whole definition into more objective way of assessment, because if you have a good objective way of assessment, then it becomes easy for us to look at. And then once we have this whole scoring system in place, then we start looking at, is this patient high demographic risk, the same demographic risk what we the scoring system, and then you look at this entire system which Dr. Nikhil is going to describe with the case by case examples. So what it looks a little scary. If you really look at it, it's a very, it looks quite a busy slide. But if you look at each pathway, it exactly explains what you need to do and what if you have all the modalities available with you. If you do not have all these lasers, TCATs, and all this, then you can probably stick to the cross-linking. And in our own study, we realized that over the last 8 years of work, most of them just need contact lenses. We are sometimes over-treating them, which is not necessary. So if you really look at the indications of, say, just a cross-linking, which is going to be the bulk of my talk today, is in these cases. And the second question is, what is progression? Because if you do not know progression, then there is no question of doing any treatment on them. Because as I said, 65 to 72% of them do not progress. Keratoconus are extremely, very docile, they're very quiet disease. We have made it into a highly progressive, it looks very aggressive because that 20% of them what we see, we try to extrapolate that entire picture to the rest, but they are extremely quiet as a disease. So criteria for progression, there's actually no real defined criteria for progression anywhere, but this is what has been said, that if you have increase in the cylinder, a corresponding change in the dioptric power. But the question is, where are you looking at? The SIMK is not your true reference of the progression. When you look at a SIMK is just the mean of everything. So there are a lot of ways of looking at it. The K1, K2 again is a mean. So you will something like we try to look at the cone and we look at the magnitude of the cone. There's a different ways of looking at it, again, which I'll describe a little later. And what we see is, corresponding to your steep axis, you have to see a change of your Pachy. When I spoke to Michael Bellin about this, he believes that more than the keratometry, the most sensitive thing in your progression has to be your pachymetry. Because pachymetry, the curvature can change sometime because of remodeling, because of your tears, because of you have not angled properly, but your pachymetry at the same point where there's a steep curvature is probably the most sensitive indicator. So pachymetry is very important. So what we did was, we looked at different ways of looking at it. We look at the clusters. See, if you have a cone area and you have a cluster of different points, we look at the clusters, and if there is a more than one diopter of change, we use, because OPSCAN, the sensitivity of OPSCAN is, repeatability and sensitivity is not that great, so I use an 1 diopter scale out here. And if there's a change in the pachymetry, this is an old slide, but still we believe that the pachymetry is a gold standard for any progression of keratoconus. If you do not show a pachymetry change, just a keratometry change, be careful about this, because that's when you may be seeing a different thing. And you can see that's a cluster in this area of the cone. And in a pentacam, see, for this is the area of, say, a steep curvature, and you look at cluster of points which are in that region, and what I'm trying to say is not a perfect way of looking at it, but there has to be a way, and each one of us has to have a proper format of how you look at progression, because if you do not look at progression, then, like I said, everything looks like a progressive disease, and a change in the pachymetry in the same area. You cannot have a pachymetric change here and say that it's progressing. If this is changing in your steep area, that means that area should also change on the pachymetry, and that is the most important thing in this whole picture. What I need to bring out here is the epithelium plays a devil here sometimes. Sometimes it works like an angel. It works both ways. What it does is sometimes it masks a lot of things. Like in this case, when I use the biopterin OCT, which is a high resolution research OCT, you can see that this is a curvature, and you can see that this curvature is not as steep as it shows here, but it's actually the epithelium which covers it up. Sometimes the epithelium masks a lot of things, so that also needs to be kept in mind. Like in this case, it's showing a cylinder. If you see that there is a 70 microns here and 58 microns in one axis, this is not the pachymetry, this is the epithelial mapping. When you see the epithelial mapping, the epithelium itself is causing at 1.5 diopters of refractive change. And sometimes when you have this kind of a thing, you may be assuming that it's a progressive disorder. So all this needs to be kept in mind before we move to the next step. And once we realize that it is a progressive disease, now I need to know that I need to cross-link. And the question which comes to a lot of us is, now what do I need to know? The first question is, what machine should I buy? It's a very simple technology actually. It's so, it doesn't really matter which machine you buy. It's not like a phaco machine where, some machines are better fluidics, some machines are better innovation, some machines are different things. Every machine, I have all the machines except for the, I think this one we don't have, but everything is the same. Whether you buy 10 lakhs to it or whether buy 6 lakhs, the technology in bit is the same, because small things like timer and other things, I don't know how much it makes a big difference. But what is very important is the kind of riboflavins you use. And riboflavin, we do have a problem in India, is because we cannot import riboflavin because it's still, I don't think there's some customs issues. So many times it's been locally made by the local distributors here. We need to understand what is the concentration he's giving. Because many times they say that this is the same riboflavin what is made by the Peshke or the other group, but sometimes you feel that you're not getting the right effect. Some of those riboflavin, I was told, create more of an effect, means you have more reactions to this. So earlier when it was done in the Dresden, they used Dextran. The Dextran is a story behind this. It's a very interesting story because that's how research sometimes leads to a different level. The Dextran was not really meant to be used for the human thing because it actually dehydrates. But when they were doing an animal studies, they used Dextran because the animal eyes were very thick. So when you use Dextran, it would dehydrate and it was easy for them to do the research work. And they gave all the applications for research was published on the Dextran. So when they actually was trying on humans, they said, why don't we change? They said, we can't change now because we have to go back to the entire ethical process again. So let's keep Dextran as it is. Let's keep quiet. So that is the reason why Dextran was introduced. Dextran was never a good thing for this because it actually changes, it dehydrates the cornea. So there are a lot of these things. I've given all the percentage, all this thing in the handouts there, which has everything given out to out on that the written thing which is with you. The second question which is asked about this is there are too many protocols and it just confuses all of us. The reason is that every time you see a paper in JCRS, you have all this coming up. 3 milliwatts, 10, 8, 30, 45 and even beyond because we want to be fast. It's extremely boring procedure for the patient and the surgeon. So we want it to be fast. The question is it all, which is better? This is all the protocols which I have summarized out here and I'm going to describe each one of it in some time now. The standard Dresden protocol was removing with the spatula using the riboflavin 0.1% with Dextran. Now we can even change to methyl cellulose and then using this energy and again then cleaning it up. So one thing about riboflavin, this slide I got from Ebnard Pearl who has with Theo Seiler the first to publish this paper. He says that when actually the riboflavin should be stored in the dark. This is very important because if you're not storing in the dark, then the efficacy may lose. And the second is when you're using the riboflavin, your OT room should be dark because it again has an effect on it. So that these are the two take-home points what I learned from him. When you come to the accelerated cross-linking, there's a different ball game out here because again the process is the same, the riboflavin is the same, and you're using the irradiation changes with the intensity and irradiation changes, but the surface energy what you give up to 30 microns, up to 30 milliwatts is more or less the same. So what are the things which we need to know when you're doing an accelerated cross-linking is you do not put the drops when you're actually using the irradiation. Normally when you're doing on a cross-linking, you actually put the drops even when the 30 minutes of wait time, soak time and then the UV time. The UV time and the soak time, you try to put the drops, you will still continue doing it, and here is something where you have to avoid it because it's an accelerated process. Sometimes the riboflavin actually blocks your cross-linking effect. That is something which is very important point is you do not drop. We call it the drop time and the soak time. The drop, you should do not drop during the UV application. Coming to this paper which we published was 5 years back, 2012. What happened was that was a big interest in the transepithelial. And they said, okay, transepithelial is simple. We can do a transepithelial cross-linking, use a different energy. So what we published on a handheld OCT was during the procedure, this is a contact lens. If you even remove a small bit of epithelium blocking, would create a complete block of cross-linking. And it's not cross-linking, it's just the riboflavin which is penetrated here. That means that the epithelium has a tremendous amount of power to block the riboflavin penetration and also the block of cross-linking. So the new protocols were devised. What is interesting in a transepithelial cross-linking is you may have to use two types of drops, not one. The first drops is a 0.25. It's a completely different drops. Many times they just give you a drop and said use it on the riboflavin. It's just a riboflavin, it will work. It will not work. And then with an HPMC and you need to use a bag because it actually loosens your epithelium. Once the epithelium is loosened, you use for 90 seconds for 4 minutes, and that is the first step. And after that, use a different riboflavin. You change the riboflavin. You discard the riboflavin or use it for the second patient and use an isotonic solution. Again, this is the process. And then you need to use whatever is your highest energy what your machine can give. You can't use a 3 milliwatts here because you need a higher energy. What is recommended by Avidro, which is they pioneered the second wave of cross-linking, is the 45 milliwatts. But you can also use 18 or 30. But what we believe is between 18 and 30 is probably the best energy when you're using a transepithelial. So if you're using a transepithelial, this is the process of how it has to be done. It has to be done with 2 drops at this point of time, one which loosens the epithelium and the other one which, once you loosen the epithelium, you need a drop which has to go into the cornea, and this is what actually goes into the cornea, because this concentration and this combination of this may not be a good cross-linker. The second question of this is, I'm just removing an epithelium. I use alcohol, I use PTK, I can use whatever, it's just an epithelial removal. Is it, do we really need to bother? And one of the work what we were doing in the lab is trying to correlate what is the best biomarker in the tissue to represent a good cross-linking. For example, what makes the, because we collect anyway everything, we collect the tissue, we collect the epithelium tears from all our patients. And what we found was that type 4 collagen, which is again a collagen of the basement membrane and the Bowman complex, correlated very well with your better outcome of cross-linking. That means if you're doing a cross-linking, you have to be very careful about how you remove the epithelium, because removing it sometimes can remove the Bowman's, it can create a breach in the Bowman's. And many times questions have been asked is why some patients do develop haze in some areas and why some patients don't develop any haze. I believe it's all related to how you remove the epithelium. Many times your Bowman's layer is not very uniform in that all over the cornea. Sometimes you have breaks and breach, and when you are removing in any way you want, you're actually trying to break the Bowman's, and when it heals, you actually change a different healing process, and that's when you got haze. So knowing this, we have to be extra careful about removing epithelium. Even alcohol is okay, but PTK, personally, there are a lot of people who believe that PTK is the best way to remove the epithelium. Personally, I believe is as atraumatic as possible. So what we started using is a blade from Epiclear, which is a very simple mechanism, but it, without alcohol, without any other mechanism, it removes the epithelium from the basement. So now the question is it really true? What you see here is we did an intraoperative OCT. What we see is this layer is the Bowman's here, this is the epithelium, and this Bowman's continues here, 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 here. So that means that this particular technique of removal epithelium with an Epiclear blade just protects the Bowman's completely. And what we found was the haze, the reaction, the recovery time, the pain was much better in this group compared to the group where you use the mechanical scraper. You can see the healing is much faster, at least a day faster. And this question is always asked is, I've been using 3 milliwatts, should I go and buy a different machine which is faster? Is faster the better, and how fast can we really go? The question is, when people were trying to go faster from 10, 18, then to 30 to 45, we thought it will go on forever and we could probably do cross-linking in 2 seconds. But the issue is, if you go by this law, when you go higher, the effect of your cross-linking actually drops. So the energy, what we believe, what we have done a study which we're just trying to publish, the best energy what we believe is between 9 and 18. 3 is very good, but 3 is longer. But because 3 we do not know, 3 has many collateral other issues. But the best energy what we believe is between 9 and 18. This is my personal thing. It's yet to be published, but this paper is written up. The other question is, I'm doing a good cross-linking, but I don't get any demarcation line. And am I doing the cross-linking right? Or should I change my way my cross-linking should be done? We all know from this work that the demarcation line can go as deep of 250 microns. And again, if you look at, we compiled all the papers which mentioned about the demarcation line. And you can see that the standard cross-linking is what we were using the 3 milliwatts. And it is much, much deeper compared to the other. As you go, your cross-linking changes, the demarcation line also keeps changing. The question is, what is this demarcation line? This is more of an optical phenomena which happens where there's a scatter of light here. It's more of, I was able to get a right image of this place on a confocal microscopy. And this is the demarcation line of the same patient. This is a pre-op of the same patient at exactly the same depth. Normally what you see is you do not see the collagen there, and you do not see any changes in that depth. But when you actually see that reflection out here, because for some time you see the reflection of the collagens are changing. There's dead keratocytes, it's a rarefaction of tissues, multiple optical phenomena keeps happening. It just does not mean that your cross-linking is perfect. It just means that each tissue is behaving differently to that reaction. That means it's just because you have more of haze doesn't mean that it's a great cross-linking. It just means that it's more collateral damage, because all this here is this whole area is no keratocytes. These are keratocytes. Loss of keratocytes is not very good. If you're killing keratocytes to get the same effect, it is not a great thing. So demarcation line may not be the best way of indicator. And it was very interesting when I compared a nonlinear optical microscopic imaging which was published by somebody on an animal eye. It exactly mimics this. This is not a cross-linked eye. This is the collagen. What we cannot see collagen otherwise. It's the only machine which can see on an animal model. For a very short duration, we were able to pick up these images of collagen bundles, and that's what this excited me. The other question is, my cornea is very thin. I have a cornea which is less than 400 microns, and what should I do? Should I treat? Should I wait? It's a very tricky question, because you don't know. Cross-linking has to be done if it's a young patient, and you need to probably treat. And there are different ways of using these drops. Again, most important thing is the drops what you use, hyperosmolar drops, and this is what we try to do every 3 minutes for 30 minutes, then 20 seconds for 5 minutes. Again, this is what has been published. So I use whatever is published. Personal, anecdotal, personal experience may not really help us here, because we don't know what is right and what is wrong. And then after that, you treat it. The efficacy of using hyperosmolar drops may not be the same as what you get in a normal kind of a cross-linking, because here you're making the cornea with water. And water does not give the same effect of cross-linking when the cornea is with water as we see with the normal cross-linking. The other thing is very important here is, this is a paper in 2013 which just tells you that when you are doing on a thinner corneas, do not put a speculum. Make the patient to blink. So you put a drop, let him close his eyes. The closing the eyes gives a much more deeper penetration of riboflavin. So when you're doing on a thinner corneas, it is better that you don't put a speculum. A small change in your protocol might help you, because that really is what this paper actually tells you. This slide was given to me by Abnad Pearl. It's still not published work, but it's very interesting work. What he says is, you can reduce the time of cross-linking when you're actually doing on a thinner corneas. That means that if your cornea is, if you're using a different 3 milliwatts or a 9 milliwatts, and if you're using on a thinner cornea, say 360 microns, and you can, instead of making it, if you use this nomogram, you can actually reduce by 20 or 30% of your time duration. That means just reducing your time actually gives you the same effect of cross-linking with much safer thing. You don't even need to use an hyperosmolar drops. And I mean, again, I want to give a disclaimer here that he's not published it yet. So he said he's just sent it for a journal. But it's very interesting, because it makes a lot of things easier, because you just have to reduce your time, and that will help you. Like what I said is, which is the best protocol, and this is one of our works which was just published, is just says that 3 milliwatts gets you probably better stability, but the worst one was your transepithelial. So that means that the transepithelial, still we do not know that whether it's going to hold the test of time, because if you really look at all the parameters, everything changes. 3, 9, 18, 30, and this is the only one which does not change too much. So that is something which we need to do. Now coming to children, how early should I treat in children, and what precautions should I take? It's very important question is, when children come to you with keratoconus, should I just jump in and treat? We have seen that children who have this keratoconus are the most progressive lot. Our tear film analysis, proteomic analysis, all of them say that they are loaded with inflammation. So different people have done different treatments. You know, you can start with this group here, which is 4. The highest is around 52. Most of them showed good stabilization. So that means you can start as early as 9 years. We have also done children with 9 years. And because otherwise, you know, most of them end up with a very progressive disorder. And we published this work. What is different? Nothing much. Only thing is we use an accelerated cross-linking of 18 milliwatts. And what we did was, what do you do after you do cross-linking on a child is the most important thing. Because you do a cross-linking, if the child has still allergy, the child has all kinds of things, you still have progression. So what we did was, using cyclosporin or anti-allergic medicine is very, very important. That is to nullify the effect of cross-linking. This talk, I think, is going to be given by the keynote by the colleague. So I'm just going to go into this interest in phakic Many people think, okay, I've cross-linked the patient. Now let me just put an ICL on this patient. This is what we thought 6 years back. And we did it on a graphic designer. And he comes and tells me, my vision is 6.6, and he designed it himself. You know, he's graphic, so he doesn't just send an email, he just sent me images. And he sent me, this is how I see. That made us thinking, see, he's reading 6.6, what is actually wrong with him? And after that, what we realized is, knowing your cone is very important when you put an ICL on a patient with in a keratoconus, irrespective of how stable it is. Because what is happening here is, this is his pupil here, and this is what you have is the cone. If pupil is his pupil has got 2 refractive errors here. He's got a more or less emetropia here and some bit of a myopic because it's a cone, and he's got coma here. What happens to this patient is, he's reading from here 6/6, but when he looks down here, it's a little scatter, but you put an ICL here, he's got a scatter. This is an after image. A classic thing, and this we published in JCRS, that if you have a coma, if you have a trefoil in your abrometry, please do not put an ICL, because you will definitely end up with a patient like this. The patient is on your quantity of vision is perfect, but what is going to happen is going to see like this. And for then, what we did for him was very unfortunate. We had to put him on a contact lens again. And I mean, he's a good patient, but it really didn't work. But it was a big eye opener for us. Post-operative care is what we do. Try to be as minimal as possible in NSAID, because it has a direct effect on cross-linking. If you try to use a lot of NSAID, like, you know, for the reduction of pain, it actually changes the collagen structure. And what antibiotic you use is a published work by Farhad Hafizi. On the day of surgery, before surgery, try to avoid anything to do with Vigamox or a moxifloxacin, because the moxifloxacin, especially Vigamox, has got the same wavelength as a riboflavin. So what happens if you put a drop, your riboflavin and Vigamox both compete for the same thing. And we know that riboflavin, the Vigamox cannot create any reaction to create a cross-linking. So issue is putting an antibiotic. Many times we don't think, we just put an antibiotic and it may be a riboflavin, and then you put a thing, and it might cause a lot of competitive issues. So that is something which we need to know. My last part of talk is just a small summary of why does cross-linking fail, when can I do a repeat cross-linking, and when should I do it. And this is the model Natasha showed, and this is the future. This is a little jumble of slides, and this is the future of cross-linking, where you can customize it to the topographies. And this is something where you use different energy compared to one single energy. That means you can use energy a little bit here, and you can change the energy according to you want. We started using it, but we don't know how long the whole effect is, because sometimes, you see a good flattening, but sometimes it can also regress back. So that is something which we need to know. The most important thing when you're looking at a progression after 6 months, you have to understand that there is a big difference between a progression and a remodeling. And that is the biggest confusion, when many times I get scans like this, where people say that, well, I think my keratoconus is progressing, and when you look at it, it's not progressing, it's a remodeling. We need to understand that just because that one area is flattening, the other area will remain the same. The keratoconus behaves differently. If one area is flattening, the other area will also steepen a little bit. So when you're looking at a remodeling, we always look at the opposite side. For example, in this patient was told that it is progressing. It's a 1 diopter progression. But if you look at the opposite side, it is plus 1 diopters flattening. So if you look at remodeling, the cornea will always have a mirror image of change. That means it has to flatten in one area, it has to steepen in the other area. Only then you call it. This is a typical way of how remodeling works. And most important thing is you look at all these parameters, look at X and Y coordinate, because you know that you're taken the scan at the same point and you're looking at the patty, thickness of the patty. If your X and Y coordinate does not match with your previous scan, that means you're taken it in a different way and a different place, and that doesn't work. These are the questions which comes to us. Why is this patient having more edema? Why am I getting more haze? The patty is very low after the surgery. Is it something wrong with this? And I still feel that it's progressing. This is all the question which comes to all of us. The answer for this is probably lies in our own pentacam, which is hidden in one of the software, is trying to look at the density. When the densitometry is nothing but the haze quantification of the cornea, what it does is, when you're looking at the densitometry changes actually changes the entire parameters of pentacam. That means if you have more density, more haze, pachymetry is abnormal, which doesn't pick up pachymetry good. You have to reduce the haze, only then the machine becomes more better in predicting the pachymetry. So that means haze is a major factor. It's actually a bias. It's factor against getting you a good pachymetry. When you're looking at the confocal microscopy, this is the preoperative stage. Why do you get more edema? Is because the epithelium is showing edematous here. There's a lot of Langerhans cells, lot of inflammation there. It is an inflammatory process, and it takes close to a year to get it to the pre-op level. So it is actually a changes which is happening in the corneal tissue. And here's what you get in different patches is because this is a keratocytes. What you see is called the rarefraction of keratocytes. And you can see anteriorly that's completely scarred. It's complete death of keratocytes. And as you go deeper, it's more fluid there. Because you can see that elongated keratocytes, which are more metabolically active, are floating around. And that is why you get these kinds of haze, because the keratocytes is there's complete death of it. And that death of keratocytes, actually, for them to repopulate to this level, it takes around 9 to 12 months. And this is exactly what you see as a haze. And why do you get it in these places is because that place of keratocytes may be more metabolically different, metabolically active, or that place may have more of, sometimes even you have a Vogt stray. So when you get this kind of haze, remember this picture, there is no keratocytes here, there's a complete death of tissues. And if you look at the demarcation line, it takes close to 6 months for the demarcation line to go. And because of all these changes, what happens is, this is the biomechanics, your pachy also drops down because your pachy is dependent on a lot of things. And if you have a haze like this, your machine, no machine on earth except your manual pachymetry will be very accurate. Your pachymetry is completely abnormal because the machine is not picking up pachymetry from this kind of a haze. Pentacam, any haze on a pentacam, the pentacam pachymetry is just useless. So it takes at least 9 months. So what you actually see as a drop of pachy is not a true drop. It's actually a pseudo drop which is caused by the changes out here. More application, I didn't run into this. We can do it for the cross-linking for non-healing bacterial ulcers, which we published recently in BJO. And it doesn't work for all ulcers, only superficial ulcers. And bilateral cross-linking, very, very careful because this is what we publish and the incidence is very low. But when you actually get one, even if it's a gram positive, it can be very virulent. And trust me, this is one of those cases. All of them, what I've seen, are all heavily antibiotic resistant. I don't know what is causing them, but they are resistant to most of the known antibiotics. So that's something which we need to keep in mind. And this is the intensity which I believe is the best. Faster the better. Again, we still don't know. We may have to, cross-linking LASIK extra where you link both, maybe a thing of future. Transepithelial, try to avoid as much as possible because I don't think it gives you great results. Like Natasha just mentioned, there are a lot of factors which are hidden, which we need to look at, and that could be the likely factors. And we probably need to look at more protocols for this. Thank you.